Hello, and welcome to Sunday Story Time, the online program where I read children's stories to adults who oftentimes act like children on social media, and mostly not in the good way. Okay, last week I told you all that the plan was to start reading Flat Stanley stories again, and that is the plan. However, unfortunately, I was not able to acquire another Flat Stanley book this week, or any of the books that have been recommended to me so far. I apologize for any disappointment this may cause, and I assure you that my production team has been sacked. But last week, I did tell you a story that my father told me when I was just a little boy. And this week we're going to do the same, as he had another story that he loved to tell as much as I loved to hear it. As with all of my father's stories, this story has a message, a moral. It's a story of compassion. It's a story of acceptance, of accepting not only people as they are, but yourself for who you are. It's a story of a little boy, another little boy. A little boy who was born exactly like any other child was born. He was identical in every way. He had 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, hair, a mouth. He was the same, except our little boy was born without a body. That's right. He was born just a head. And he never thought anything of that, because his parents never raised him to think he was different at all. His parents raised him in a house full of joy and love, and they loved him unconditionally. He was raised with happiness. And then one day he was old enough where he had to go to school. And he was so excited. The morning of the first day of school, he woke up and he was just so excited to be going to the Temple of Knowledge to learn everything there was to learn. He was so excited. He rolled himself out of his bed. He rolled himself to a closet and he got all dressed up. Put on a bow tie. He rolled himself down to the kitchen and he rolled himself up into his chair and he had his breakfast with his mommy, and he was so excited to be going to the Temple of Knowledge to learn everything there was to learn. So when the bus got there, he rolled himself out of his house. He rolled himself down the sidewalk. He rolled himself up into his bus. He rolled himself down the aisle, rolled himself up into his seat, and sat on the ride to school. And when the bus got to school, he rolled himself out of his seat. He rolled himself out of the bus. He rolled himself up the sidewalk, down the hall, into his classroom, up into his seat, and there he sat ready to learn everything there was to learn. But right next to him, in the desk right next to him, was a little girl. And this little girl looked at him and went, You are just a head. You are weird. You don't have 2 arms or 2 legs or 2 feet or a belly button or anything. You're weird. Look at him, everybody. Look at him. He's weird. Well, this made the little boy very sad. And at the end of the day, he rolled himself out of his desk, rolled himself down the hallway, rolled himself up into his bus and down the aisle and up into his seat. And when the bus got home, he rolled himself out of his seat and down the aisle, out of the bus, rolled himself up into his house, right up into his bed, where he cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. Until his mommy came up and said, "Son, why are you crying? What's the matter?" And the little boy said, "Mommy, the little girl in school made fun of me and told me that I was weird and that I wasn't like everybody else because I'm just a head, and it made me feel really sad." And his mom said, "Oh, honey, you don't have to worry about what anybody else thinks about you, because you're beautiful just as you are, and you can be anything you want to be. All you have to do is wish." So that night at bedtime, just before he went to sleep, the little boy wished. And he wished, 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 and he wished. And he woke up the next morning, and he was an orange. He rolled himself out of his bed. He rolled himself down to the kitchen. He rolled himself up into his seat to have his breakfast with his mommy. He drank his orange juice. Weird. But when the bus got there, he rolled himself out of the house, rolled himself up into the bus, rolled himself down the aisle up into his seat, and rode to school. And when the bus got to school, he rolled himself out of the bus, rolled himself up the sidewalk, down the hallway, into his classroom, and up into his seat. And there he was again, ready to learn whatever there was to learn. And there was the little girl right in the desk next to him who went, "What? You're an orange." She says, "The rest of us are all little boys and girls, but you are an orange. You're weird. Now look at him, kids. Everybody make these. He's an orange." And this made our little boy very sad. So at the end of the day, he rolled himself out of his desk. He rolled himself up into the bus, down the aisle, and up into his seat. And when the bus got home, he rolled himself out of the bus, rolled himself up into his house, rolled himself up into his bedroom and into his bed, and he cried and cried and cried and cried until his mommy came up and said, "Son, what's the matter? Why are you crying again?" And the little boy said, "Mommy, that little girl made fun of me again today because I'm an orange, and it made me sad." And Mommy said, "Son, you don't have to worry about what anybody thinks about you because you are perfect just the way you are. And you can be anything you want to be. All you have to do is wish." So that night before he fell asleep, the little boy wished, and he 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 wished. And the next morning he woke up and he was a banana. And he flopped himself out of his bed. He flopped himself down into the kitchen, flopped himself up into his seat, and he had breakfast with his mommy waiting for the bus to come so he could go to the Temple of Knowledge and learn everything there was to learn. When the bus got there, he flopped himself out of the house. He flopped himself up into the bus, flopped himself down the aisle, flopped himself up into his seat, and waited as the bus rode to school. When the bus got to school, he flopped himself out of the bus. He flopped himself up the sidewalk, flopped himself down the hallway into his classroom and up into his seat. And there he was, just bound and determined that this time he was going to learn everything there was to learn. And there was that little girl. Look at you. What is up with you, you're a banana. The rest of us are all children. We're little boys and girls with arms and legs, and you are a banana. Look at him, everybody. Look, he's a banana. Make fun of him. And this made the boy really sad. At the end of the day, he flopped himself out of the school, flopped himself up into the bus, flopped himself into his seat. When the bus got home, he flopped himself out of his seat, flopped himself out of the bus, flopped himself up the sidewalk, up into his bedroom, up into his bed, and he cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. Till his mommy said, "What's the matter now? What happened?" He said, "The little girl made fun of me." She said, "Son, don't worry about it. You can be whatever you want to be. You're beautiful the way you are, but all you got to do is wish." So he woke up the next morning after wishing and wishing and wishing, and he woke up and he was a watermelon. And he wobbled himself out of his bed. He wobbled himself out of the house. He wobbled himself up into the bus and into his seat. And when the bus got to school, he wobbled himself out of the bus. He wobbled himself up the sidewalk. He wobbled himself out down the hallway, into his classroom, and up into his seat. And this time he was going to learn. This time he was just bound and determined this was the day. And there was that little girl. There was that little girl. She was like, "Ah." Look at you, you're a freaking watermelon. What is up with you? And the little boy was sad. The little boy was sad. He wobbled himself out of his desk, he wobbled himself to the bus, he wobbled himself up into his seat and waited for the bus to take him home. When the bus got home, he wobbled himself up into his bed and he cried and cried and cried. And once again, his mom came up and said, "Son, you don't have to worry about what the other kids think. You're beautiful, perfect, just the way you are, and you can be whatever you want to be. All you have to do is wish." So he wished, and 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 he wished. And the next morning, he woke up and he was a grape. And he rolled himself out of the house. He rolled himself up into the bus. He rolled himself up into his seat and he rode the bus to school. When the bus got to school, he rolled himself out of the bus. He rolled himself up the sidewalk, down the hallway, into his classroom, into his desk. And this time, he was going to learn this time. It was it. This was the day. He was going to learn. And finally, there that little girl was. There she was. She made fun. She went, "I can't, what is up with you, kid? You're a grape. You're not even as good as any of us because we have 2 arms and hands and legs and toes, and you're just a grape." And finally, the little boy just said, "You know what? Bite me, little girl. I have been coming here every day, and all I want to do is learn. All I want to do is learn, just like everybody else. And what do? Instead of being nice to you call me names, you make fun of me and make me feel bad about myself. You know what, little girl? You are a bitch. Nobody likes you. Nobody's ever liked you. You're a mean, nasty little witch of a girl." And then the little girl just got so mad, she picked him up, she threw him on the ground, and she squished him. Moral of the story is quit while you're ahead. Another story from my father. Thank you for joining us at Sunday Story Time again. If you enjoy the stories that I tell you each and every week, please share with a thumbs up or a comment in the comments. Comments help a lot. Share with your friends. If you really enjoy what I do here on Sunday Story Time, drop $1 in the virtual tip jar at Gary Lewis at PayPal. Drop $1 in. If you enjoy any of the stories, any of the things that I do for entertainment purpose here, please feel free to drop me $1. Every little bit helps. Peace, love, understanding. You are beautiful just the way you are.